does the, where does the responsibility of making music a ministry really lie? In this particular lecture and on this particular tape, I'd like to talk to choir directors for just a few minutes. Let's forget about our choir. Let's forget about those that won't be faithful. Let's forget about all of these things and think about where does the real responsibility of making music a ministry lie. Choir director, I believe it lies with us, with you and with me. We're never going to teach our choir, hey, this thing is a ministry. This business of singing for the Lord is a ministry, if it's not a ministry to us. And I want us to take a few minutes together and think about some of the things we need to do in order to make music a ministry to our choir by making it, first of all, to ourselves. We must realize, of course, as we've talked about in other lectures, that every Christian must do his own singing. We talked about that in connection with the verse that says, be not drunk with wine and so on, but be filled with the Spirit, and then singing and making melody. But in more than 500 places in the Word of God, the Bible speaks of singers or of musicians and musical instruments or something related to music and to its use in worship services. More than 500 times. 3/4 of the chapters in the Bible refer to music in some way or another. So it's important to God. And choir directors, it's up to us to make it a ministry to our people. Now let's think of some ways that we can. First of all, music should center around a person. Our music program should center around a person. That person is the Lord Jesus Christ. Oh, when you remember that God gave His Son to die for us, that we might live one day with Him, when we remember that He loved us that much, it ought to make us want to keep Christ as the central theme of everything that we do. Now, our music department and our music ministry must center around one person, and that one person being the Lord Jesus Christ. And there are several things I think can help us to do that. First of all, develop a real responsibility toward the people and their needs. I talked to the choir in one of the other lectures about the fact that there are going to be people in your congregation Sunday morning that have real needs. Some of them are going to be brokenhearted. Some of them are going to be sick. Some of them are going to have needs that you don't even know about. And you need to reach out and fill those needs and meet those needs. But choir director, you're going to have people in your choir Sunday that have needs. You're going to have some dear lady in your choir that has a burden you can't even imagine. You're going to have some man that maybe fights obstacles in order to be able to be a part of the music ministry. You're going to have some that are facing unbelievable things in their lives. And choir director, if they're going to be able to make it a ministry, and they're going to be able to minister to others, you are the key to making it minister, first of all, to your choir. Develop a real responsibility, a real sense of that responsibility of the needs of your people. Develop a real awareness of what they enjoy, of the congregation, what kind of music do they like. You've got to sing some of the things that they enjoy singing. Remember, the person in the congregation has just as much right to their opinion as you have to yours. It might differ with you, but as long as it's good music, as long as it's scripturally sound, then they have a right to that opinion. And in order to reach them, you must use music that runs the gamut, so to speak, and covers the entire span of gospel music and of sacred music. Discover the difference between support and obligation. Choir director, your job is to support the pastor and to support the ministries of the church. Now, I think sometimes if we aren't careful, we get to the point where we think the music program is the only thing in the church that's important. And that just isn't true. The Sunday school is important. The bus ministry is important. Your training union programs are important. All the other avenues and areas of service are just as important. They're not your ministry, so they're not as important to you, but they are important to the cause of Christ and to the church as a whole. But our main obligation is to support the pastor and to support the programs of the church. Don't get to the point where it's, well, I'm obligated to do this and I have to, and everybody expects me to, so I'm going to do that. No, when we stoop to that depth, we've reached the bottom. When we stoop to that depth, we're almost out of the ministry. We need to make sure We walk into our churches on Sunday morning excited and alive and expecting something to happen, expecting God to do something first of all through the music. Choir director, you can't do that if there's things in your life that you haven't confessed to the Lord. Hey, let's talk about it right down where we live for a few moments. I said to the choir in one of the other lectures, some of them are going to come in, they're upset with their husband or wife, and you can't expect to sing that way. But choir director, you can't expect to be a leader in the church service unless your heart's right. Unless things are right between you and the Lord, you can't expect to lead the people. And you must remember that it is your duty to support the pastor, and first of all by making sure that spiritually in your own heart everything's right. Dedicate yourself to some positive leadership attitudes. You will never lead your choir musically until you lead them spiritually. Let me repeat that. Choir director, you can't lead your choir musically if you can't lead them spiritually. I tire of people saying, well, don't watch my life. I'm just going to lead you musically. And I've known some that did that. That's not true. It doesn't work that way. We must lead our people, be leaders in faithfulness. I think we ought to be leaders in visitation and the other programs of our church. I think you ought to be leaders in tithing. I don't think you can expect to work with people and be leaders if you don't tithe. And I know some choir directors that don't. And that's not right. God expects you to be a leader among the people. Then I think this is important. Utilize your time. Realize that every minute of your time counts. Time is one of the most precious commodities that we have. And once it's gone, it's spent. And there's no two ways about it. Once we've wasted it, it's wasted forever. And I think musicians sometimes are famous for wasting time. Choir directors, we say, well, I don't practice like I used to. I just don't have time. Now, come on. Who are we kidding? I don't really have the time to build my music program the way I want to. Now, we can tell each other that, or we can tell our pastor that, or we can even tell our choir that, but we can't really tell ourselves that and believe it. We have time for everything else we want to do. And we make time for those things that are important, whether it's watching a football game on TV or going out and doing something we want to do. And those things are not wrong as long as they don't interfere with your ministry. First of all, utilize your time. I think another thing, begin to verbalize your dreams. What do you mean exactly, Leonard, by what you're saying? What do you mean verbalize your dreams? Oh, I think you ought to be able to say, hey, I want my choir to be the greatest in this city. I want it to be the greatest in our state. I'd like to have 75 people in my choir. You say, oh, we could never reach that. Well, with that attitude, you probably won't. Personally, my dream for my choir at Calvary Baptist Church in Connersville is to see them reach the 100 mark. I think we'll do it. I think it'll take a while, but I think we will do it because I've already prayed about it and I begin to work toward that end and tell our people, hey, I want to see our choir reach 100. Verbalize your dreams. You remember the story of the Apostle Peter when he saw the Lord walking on the water. And I think he looked out and thought, boy, I wish I could do that. But it was when he said, Lord, let me come to you. And Jesus said, come on. And we say quickly, well, yeah, but he didn't walk very far, but he did start. There was a bunch more of them in the boat that didn't even get started. So verbalize your dreams. Be willing to say, hey, this is what I want for my choir, and I'm going to work toward that end. Then challenge yourself. Challenge yourself to be the best choir director you can possibly be. I told the choir the other day, we have no right to ask God to do anything more for us until we're using all the resources He's given us. Choir director, the answer to your problems usually is not going to be a soprano that can top out on a high C and that can read everything you put in front of her. No, if you're not using the members you already have, then don't expect God to send you more. We all work with volunteer choirs. We don't have professionals in our choirs. The majority of us are very fortunate to have 2 or 3 good readers. If we're fortunate, we have at least 1 or 2 in each section. But that doesn't always happen. But we still can build a music ministry for the glory of the Lord. And challenge yourself to excel, first of all, in performance, in your lifestyle. Hey, that's a good challenge. Challenge yourself to do exactly what you think the Lord Jesus Christ would have you to do, and then He'll reward you by giving you the desires of your heart. Use these things as stepping stones. Another thing, how can you make ministry, music a ministry to your choir? There are several ways. One thing, remind them constantly of the ministry. Teach your choir to be sensitive to the needs of each other and to the needs of the congregation. Be warm. Create a spiritual climate. Now, I'm not talking about, don't be overly serious. Man, your choir practice has to be a time of at times being jovial, and you have to laugh and you have to enjoy being together. But make sure, regardless of what you do it in a spiritual climate, and that it always points to the fact of music being a ministry in your church. Guard against any kind of routine getting to a rut. Dr. Oldham used to say, a rut is nothing more than a grave with both ends kicked out. And I think sometimes we get into a rut. And hey, choir directors, let me warn you about this. And all of us are guilty. So many times we get into a rut of using the same music when we're lazy. We say, oh, they love to do this. They don't like to do it as much as we don't have anything else prepared, so we drag out our sugar stick and we sing it one more time. Don't get in a rut. Don't get in a rut in your rehearsal times. Don't get to the point to where every time they come in, they sit down, they pick up their music, and everything is just like it has been for the last 6 or 8 months. Do something different. Switch your sections around. Mix them up. Sometimes one of the best techniques that you can use, make your choir stand up, sit a bass, a soprano, an alto, and a tenor, and fill your whole choir off that way. They'll go absolutely crazy the first time you try it. They know they can't sing without somebody by them singing the same part, but it's good training. I don't recommend that you do that in a service too quickly, but change your choir practice up a little bit. Give them something new and exciting to do. Make sure you praise your choir. Let them know you appreciate them. I'll guarantee you, you pick at them enough, you humiliate them enough, and you'll lose them. And choir director, whether we want to admit it or not, we can stand up and wave our arms and yell and scream all we want to about it being an obligation. But if they don't want to, they don't have to be there Sunday morning. Our entire ministry as a choir director depends on their faithfulness. And come Sunday morning, if I've made everybody in my choir mad, all they've got to do is sit out in the congregation. You say, they have no right to do that. No, they don't. But we have no right to treat them in a way that would make them want to. You make sure you let them know they're appreciated. Communicate with them and help them to learn to communicate with the congregation. Make sure that they express what they're singing. Look like the music. If you're singing a song that's happy, smile and make sure that they smile and that they relate to the congregation, the message that you're trying to get across. Study the words. Remember, communication starts with the very soul. And you study the words of a new song. You sit down with a brand new piece of music, and the first thing you ought to do is read through those words together and say, choir, let this speak to your heart. Let it say something first of all to you, and then you can get it across to the congregation. I tell my choir over and over again, if it doesn't speak to you, it's not going to do anything for anybody else. Teach them eye contact. Teach them to begin to look at the people, to watch you, but also look at the people when they do special music, or give the appearance of looking at the people, not over their heads. Teach your choir to follow you. You say, I've tried, but I can't do that. Yes, you can if you really work at it. Constantly remind them of the importance. Let them know, hey, if you don't follow me, I can't do what I want to with the music. Teach them this way. Teach them a lot of songs by memory. Teach them to memorize choruses. Hide those things down in their hearts. Learn all of the choruses and songs that you can by memory, and it'll help you in every way. There are other ways to build excitement and to build interest in your choir, but we're going to go on to something else for just a few minutes. We hear so much about making a joyful noise to the Lord, but let me ask you, is it good enough just to get up and say, all right, choir, it really doesn't matter how you sound, just sing. just sing for the glory of the Lord. No, I think God expects us to do our very best. And choir directors, that starts with you. If your choir is a failure, it's your fault, not theirs. You say, I don't like that. No, we don't, but it's true. If my choir flops on Sunday morning, it's not their fault, it's my fault. And we ought to begin to train them from the very first. And you say, well, I've been at my church for a long time. All right, go back and say, all right, I want to train you to watch me. I want you to begin to watch me so I can do with you what I want to do. Know the limitations of your choir. Don't get to the point that you think, hey, I'm going to give them all this hard stuff, and if they can't do it, then that's just because they aren't as well equipped as they should be. Know your limitations. Select music that's practical for your particular choir. What would work with my choir might not work with yours. What would work with yours probably, in many cases, wouldn't work with my choir. But learn the limitations of your choir. If they can't sing a good 4-part harmony, choose songs for a 3-part. There are some tremendous arrangements out today in SAB, soprano, alto, and 1-part men. And don't hesitate to use those things. We're told in the Scriptures that we're to sing from the heart and to sing with joy and to sing with gladness and all of these things. And incorporating these elements into our music will not only minister more effectively to God, but it'll bless the congregation. And you know, an illustration that I've thought about a lot of times, if we were asked to sing for the President of the United States, if you got a call this week and said, I want you and your choir to come and to sing for a presidential prayer breakfast in, say, 2 months' time, you would have your choir at the church day and night. You would work them silly. They'd practice everything they knew and a lot they didn't know. And you'd polish them to the very best of your ability. You would work with them on how to dress and how to stand and how to smile and how to communicate. And then you would do everything you could to put on the best performance possible, and you ought to do that. But choir directors, every Sunday morning we stand before the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And one of these days the President will move off the scene and another will take his place if the Lord tarries his coming. But throughout all eternity, we'll still be singing for the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. If you can get across to your people the fact that they are singing for the Lord of glory. But choir director, it'll start with you. You can't lead them musically. You can't lead them spiritually. You can't teach them to be concerned if you're not concerned. You can't teach them to be spiritual if you're not spiritual. Work with your musicians. Be kind to your accompanist. A lot of times we run into problems with accompanists, and all of us have been there at one time or another. But hey, choir director, be kind. Don't chew them out. Especially, don't ever chew them out in front of the choir. Don't chew them out, period. Don't even scold them in front of your choir. You be kind to them. Remember, Sunday morning comes and she says, I don't want to play. And you're up the proverbial creek. So you be kind to your musicians. Now, some things that a choir director ought to be. And here again, just as in the other lectures, we can't cover everything that I'd like to. I wish I had 2 or 3 hours to sit down and talk with you. I'm not all that smart, and I don't have all that much knowledge, but God's given me 24 years of experience. And I guess in those 24 years, we've covered just about every problem that can arise. I am so thankful for the training I got at Arlington Baptist College. But they can't train you in a classroom what to do when you've practiced for 2 months on a special song and Sunday morning comes and your soloist is sick. Those are the kind of things you learn on the field. They can't teach you what to do when half your choir members don't show up for choir practice and you've got a special number coming up and you know that they're not going to be ready for it. These are the things you learn. You learn a lot of them on your knees. I've said to my choir over and over again, and I would say to you, the best way to be a good choir director is the best way to be a good choir member, and that's on your knees. But there are some things from a technical standpoint you ought to learn. Choir directors, we've passed the stage when we say, it's not important to know anything about music. All you have to do is just get up and lead them with your voice and do your best. No, that's not true anymore, because you have people in your congregation and in your choir that have studied music. Most of our high school students now, if they've had chorus or band, they come out with as much of a knowledge of music as most of our choir directors had in years past. First of all, be technically competent. Keep up with the competition. You say, we're not in the competition business. I'm not talking about being in competition with other choir directors or with other churches. I'm talking about being in competition with Satan, and whether we like it or not, we are. And you better keep up with the latest things in music. You better be musically aware and alert, and you better know what's going on in the field of music. Use new techniques with your choir. Use new music with your choir. Don't try to use the same thing with your youth choir that you do with your adult choir. They won't buy that. By the same token, don't try to use the same thing with your children's choir that you do with your teenagers. That won't work either. Learn what to use with each age group. Be friendly and be personable and be ready when they need you. Now, your choir members will come to you sometimes with spiritual problems. And I'm not saying you should ever take the place of the pastor. God knows my heart on that. I've not had a problem with that. I think the pastor is the pastor and always ought to be lifted up, and he ought to be the one that everybody goes to with their spiritual problems. But you're going to have times. I have in my ministry when someone would come to me and say, Brother Leonard, I need to talk to you. A choir member that felt like they could talk to me maybe more easily than they could to anyone else. And you better be spiritually committed to what you're doing. You better be able to talk with them. Here again, I don't buy this. Well, I just don't want to talk to anyone about spiritual problems. Well, they might not want to talk to anyone else. And you be ready. You remember that your primary task is getting your choir to the point that they can communicate the message of Jesus Christ. And if that takes some spiritual counseling, then choir director, that's your responsibility. If that takes working with them extra, then that's your responsibility. Above the singing, above the teaching the new music, above everything else, you are in a position to be a leader spiritually among your people. And you ought to do that. You ought to be more advanced than your followers. You ought to be more advanced than your followers musically. You ought to know more than they do. You ought to make it a point to study. You can't rely on what you learned 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And hey, they catch on to that in a hurry. They catch on to the fact that you keep going back to something you know rather than learning something new. So you need to keep up and be more advanced than they are. Be willing to accept criticism. Now, I'm not talking about open criticism. I'm talking about just criticism. If they come to you and say, why do you do this a certain way, be ready to tell them. But don't get mad and slam your book down and say, I do it that way because I want to, and if you don't like it, get out, because they probably will. But also, be more advanced than they are spiritually. Or not to be a person in your choir that's more dedicated to the Lord and more committed to the cause of Christ than you are. You must love your followers. Now, I think that's one of the greatest problems choir directors we're facing today. Most of us don't really love our people. Most of us don't really, really love those people that sit there and look to us every Sunday and every choir practice to lead them musically. Oh, you can get by with a lot of things if you love your people. You can get by with a lot of things if you let them know that you really love them. Several other things that I'd like to cover. One, you must always stand by your convictions. Don't compromise. You better know where you're going. You better set some goals and have some objectives. And you must know where you're going. You must let your people know that you know where you're going. In closing, let me say this. Directors, whose responsibility is it to make music a ministry? Is it the pastors? No. Is it the choir members? No. Is it the musicians? No. It's ours. If you have a spiritual choir and a choir that loves the Lord and a choir that sings for souls, it's because you've trained them that way. If you have a choir that loves the ministry aspect of it and sings because it is a ministry, it's because you've trained them that way. And sad to say, choir directors, if you have a choir that's unconcerned and is interested only in coming in and doing a musical performance and going out again and doing what they want to do and forgetting about the other aspects of the church, it's because you've trained them that way. Whose responsibility is it to make music a ministry? Choir directors? It's ours, yours, and mine. The ministry aspect of it and sings because it is a ministry. It's because you've trained them that way. And sad to say, choir directors, if you have a choir that's unconcerned and is interested only in coming in and doing a musical performance and going out again and doing what they want to do and forgetting about the other aspects of the church, it's because you've trained them that way. Whose responsibility is it to make music a ministry?